Microsoft scooping up Yammer. And we've got Shira Ovide joining us now from San Francisco, our bureau there. Shira, you're the Microsoft reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Why are they buying Yammer?
It's a fair question. I mean, it's a $1.2 billion acquisition, which is maybe not that big for Microsoft, but pretty expensive if you look at Yammer's revenue, which is, maybe 10, 20, $30 million a year. What they say is that there are functions that Yammer does, which is primarily like a Facebook for the workplace, kind of a private social network for companies. And Microsoft is very interested in that functionality. They think it's kind of a new thing that companies have embraced, and they want to add it to features of Microsoft Office, as well as continue selling Yammer as a standalone service.
Now, you say in your story, it's $1.2 billion transaction is a transaction that highlights a new trend in business software and, quote, perceived shortcomings in Microsoft's own products.
Right.
Tell us about these perceived shortcomings.
Well, when you talk to people who have run business software companies, one thing they say is there's a whole class of companies, things like Yammer and Jive and Box and Dropbox and Basecamp, and the startup list is very long. These are kind of so-called cloud business software companies, right? So business software that's provided over the internet instead of boxed software that Microsoft sells, Office and things like that. And some people say, look, if Microsoft did a good job kind of providing these same functions that these startups are providing, then there would be no need for these multi-billion-dollar valuations for companies like Box and Dropbox and Yammer.
That's an interesting idea that maybe they could have done this in-house, but apparently they can't seem to do it. Question for you, though, is will this really catch on? Because a lot of people I know use Facebook at work anyway, even when communicating with their colleagues. So why would you need yet another thing to use?
I think that's a very fair question. I think there's a lot of skepticism out there about business social networks in general. It is true that there are millions of people using this inside of companies, using things like Yammer and Chatter and Jive and similar services inside companies. For the most part, these people are using it for free. Maybe it's like small groups inside of a company who happen to have latched on to things like Yammer. But you're right that these services have yet to prove that they can be big businesses and that they can convince companies to pay for it rather than convince a small handful of users to adopt it for free.
I think the key there is the paying for it. We've also, you quote Steve Ballmer, Chief Executive of Microsoft, in your story, says the acquisition of Yammer underscores our commitment to deliver technology that businesses need and people love. The "and people love" bit, do people really love Yammer?
Some people love Yammer. Yeah, some people love a lot of things.
So do they feel, getting back to the perceived shortcomings, does Ballmer think that maybe they need more of an entrepreneurial culture within Microsoft to get little things like this going? I know when a company gets big, it's hard.
It's a very fair question, and I think it was interesting to hear Steve Ballmer and others at Microsoft yesterday talk about the adoption model, the unique adoption model they called it at Yammer, which is, Microsoft sells software directly to IT departments, and then it trickles down to regular Joe workers like you and me. Yammer, on the other hand, tries to get its social networking services adopted by regular Joe worker, and then goes to IT departments and says, hey, do you know there are tens or hundreds of people inside the company that are using Yammer already? Don't you want to buy this? So Microsoft said yesterday this viral adoption model is very interesting, and they think that this is something maybe they can seed in other Microsoft businesses.